Today is going to be the day that we are getting into Enscape. Now, what's really great, I think, about Enscape personally is the fact that, first off, it is free if you're a student. So if you use the email I sent a couple weeks back, you're going to be able to get your free student copy from there. So that's the first great thing about it. And the second thing is it updates in real time. So I know that when we chatted about Lumion, I had to include that patch about how to include that plugin so that you could do a live sync of your Lumion model. With Enscape, you don't need to do that. Anything you do in your model will immediately be visible in your rendering window in Enscape. Now, the tricky part about this, though, I will say, is for those of you who have screens or can patch into like an extra HDMI cable, you're going to be in luck on this, because the way this is going to work, as you will see in a couple minutes here, is you're going to have your whatever your chosen 3D modeling software, whether it's SketchUp or Rhino or Revit, Enscape exists for all of them, is going to be in one window, and then you're going to have your live updates in the other window. So I'm going to have to kind of use my screen a bit economically here, and I apologize if it gets a little crowded, but essentially live updating from your 3D software is kind of the joy of Enscape. So yeah, we can get into it here. So we'll say I have jumped into whatever modeling software I've chosen. And again, whether you're into SketchUp or Rhino, the means of access Enscape is going to more or less always be the same. Now, before we jump to that, there is something that I realize we could have gone into a little bit more detail on when we were first introducing Enscape, and that is creating scenes. Now, since this assignment revolves around creating perspectives in different angles, the ability to create scenes is going to be really valuable. And a scene is really just like a saved perspective from a certain angle that you can easily return to, and once you save your work, you won't have lost it. So the way that you create a scene is basically like this. Our default tray is our ticket to all kinds of good stuff in SketchUp. And if you might recall, our default tray, much like our panels in AutoCAD or Illustrator, is accessible by one of our drop-down menus, and that is our window drop-down. So we'll go down to Window. We're going to move down to Default Tray, and you're going to see Show Tray over here, if it's not immediately coming up already. So we'll tap left-click, and check this out. You're going to have your whole bunch of different options, tags, entity info, all the stuff we talked in the first SketchUp class. But then you're also going to have scenes right here. So you're going to go to drop down for scenes. So as you can see, I have a couple already shown already. But let's say this is empty and I want to make a completely fresh one. And I'm in a spot where I think, or that's a perspective that I really want to make sure I can capture and return to later on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure scenes is available in my default tray. And if it's not immediately appearing, don't panic. All you do is you just go up to Window, Default Trays, and you're going to notice Scenes in Default Tray. If that's unchecked, just make sure it's checked, and there it'll be. With the Scenes panel available, we're just going to move up to this plus sign right here, and you're going to notice we have the option to Add Scene. So if we tap left-click on the plus, look at this. The scene just appeared in this tab up on the top left. So me personally, I like to name my scenes just so that it's not really disorganized and crazy, and I'm not scratching my head wondering, what was that one? Because as you build your models out, you might get to a state where you have like 20 different scenes saved. So I personally recommend naming your work, moving up to right-click this tab, and you're going to have the option to rename. So we'll tap left-click and we'll say Coffee Roasters. Because if I'm flying around and let's say I'm messing about over here or something, and I say, hey, I really want to get back to that coffee roasters scene that I had that was showing good information, I just tap left click and SketchUp will take you right back to it. As you can see, I've got a couple already saved in here too. So if I tap into here, I can jump into either of the other scenes that I've saved as well. I know those look a little creepy right now. That's going to make sense in a couple of minutes. Don't you worry. Now, I know it might seem a little random that I'm just bringing this up now, but there's a reason behind this. When you're using Enscape, the big difference is, unlike Lumion or Twinmotion, where it's kind of a supplementary software that's in a different program, Enscape lives right inside your 3D modeling software, which is why when you went and downloaded it, those of you who already have, it probably asked you, what 3D modeling software do you want to download this for? So when you're creating your views in Enscape, as we're going to find out in a little bit here, you're going to notice something. Any of the views you create are going to appear along with your views and scenes that you've got saved right up here. So again, Enscape is just something that lives inside of your 3D modeling software. And as we start developing it, as you see things appear up here in your scenes, that's just because, you know, Enscape's kind of an all-in-one sort of thing. So assuming you have 4 gigs of RAM on your machine, which I believe all of you should, that should be plenty. I think we're ready to start jumping in here. So we'll say you've opened up your 3D model. You're looking around, you're like, I don't see any icon or anything reflecting, you know, the fact that Enscape actually worked. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to move your cursor over to your extensions, and you're going to tap left click, and you're going to move down. And if you've successfully downloaded Enscape for whatever software you intended to use, you're going to find Enscape should be living somewhere in your extensions. So you're going to scroll down to Enscape, you're going to move over, and you're going to see you have a whole bunch of different options. Just for right now, I think it'd be a good idea for us to get a bit of a taste for what Enscape land is like. So they're going to tap left click and hit start. It might take a minute or two because there's a lot to process, but ultimately the results you're going to see are something like this. Okay, so as I go through this, I'm frequently going to have half my window SketchUp, half my window Enscape, but for now we're just going to go ahead and go full screen. Okay, great. So we are officially in Enscape land. Now, again, split screens are really going to be helpful for this, but, you know, just for now, we can all kind of just bear along with it. So, do you guys remember those directional keys that we talked about in Lumion? Well, our navigation process is actually going to be really quite similar when we're moving around in Enscape. Again, those of you who are video game players already know this, but if you move over to your key directions, you'll already know that W is move forward, S is step backward, D is straight to the left, and A is move to the right. Now what you're also going to find is, again, a lot of this will be transferable to Lumion, but E is going to allow you to float upward and Q downward. If you want to move fast, you can hold shift down to let you kind of sprint toward whatever you want to get to. Now, there's going to be a few elements of Enscape that'll allow you to navigate your space a little bit more organically. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about in just a second here. You have the option to transfer between walk mode and fly mode. And what I mean by that is this. Currently, if you're in fly mode, it means you're essentially like, you can fly through different surfaces, you can navigate completely freely, you can strafe up, down, any way you want to go. You're completely unencumbered by any sort of physical space, right? Now, if I want to enter walk mode, let's say I want to give a client or somebody like that a very realistic experience navigating through the space. What I'm going to do is I can transfer between fly mode, which I'm currently in, and walk mode by hitting the space bar. Now, do you notice that kind of just did a little bit of a stutter step there? All that did was that essentially put me from fly mode into walk mode. Now, once I'm in walk mode, what that means is my perspective is at a believable human height. You know, I'm very much navigating the space realistically, kind of like a real person of a certain height would. And look at this. I can no longer just blaze through walls or anything like that. I'm now constricted to where an actual person could walk. So, I mean, it just adds a little touch of realism. Now, you're also probably wondering, like, okay, that's great. So you can kind of navigate in a realistic fashion. What about looking around? Okay, so this is where there's a little bit of deviation between Lumion and Enscape. But if you want to take a look around, let's say I want to essentially pan across, you know, my view here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tap and hold left click about the point that I'd essentially like to navigate around. I'm holding left click and I'm dragging. And dragging to the right will essentially allow me to look to the left and right as I want to. By holding the right cursor down, it'll essentially allow me to strafe across the scene in a fashion that's sort of realistic. So again, left click and hold, look any which way you want, and right click allows you whoa, to strafe. Okay, great. So all that's good. We're gonna take a step back in flight mode just for a moment, so we can fly out of here and take a look and see what else is going on in this model. So spacebar, and now I'm essentially unencumbered by the laws of physics, and I can just fly outside. Great. Now that we've got a little bit of grasp on moving around in this model, I think now is not a bad time for us to maybe get ourselves a little more oriented. So let's see what we can do about that. Tapping the M key once you're in the actual Enscape rendering portion output brings up a little mini map. So if you're ever struggling to see, where you are in this model, where you're oriented, you're going to find that tapping the M key and toggling that on will allow you to see exactly where you are in the greater model space. We'll go ahead and turn that off just for the moment. Tapping B will bring up all of your BIM options where you can assign different materials. We won't get into that as much today since we're already going to have a bit of a different material discussion, but it is good to know for those of you who are looking into BIM more that option is out there. We'll tap B again to toggle that off. All right, so let's have a step outside here. Because I know so much of your work is dependent on things like shadow studies, showing stuff at different times of day, I have some portion of Enscape here that I think is going to be really valuable to you. If we take a step outside here, we'll look somewhere where we can for sure get a pretty good view of the sky. You're going to notice something. You're able to change the time of day just by holding Shift down, holding the right cursor down, and dragging across your screen. So essentially, if you want to show more of an evening shot, you're able to. If you want to show a shot that's taken kind of in twilight or later at night, you certainly can as well. Ooh, spooky. So the idea there is it's going to be valuable for you guys to show your work at different times. I realized that in Lumion, there was a portion of this that was a lot more robust in terms of showing like mornings, evenings, nights in different cloudy circumstances. This, for those who find that a little bit more intimidating, is a lot simpler. So basically, to recap, once you're in the world of Enscape, changing the weather is as easy as holding Shift down, holding the right cursor down, and dragging across the screen to watch the day essentially pass by. So that's a little bit on adjusting your daytime. Now, if you look up here, we're going to get into all these different options. But if you look up here, you're going to notice something. This polygon up here essentially allows you to flip through your different ways that you can actually view your model. So currently, if we tap on this, we're in perspective view. Okay, cool. Now, if we scroll down, we're going to see we also have the option to get into 2-point or orthographic. So we're going to try 2-point for a moment here, and we're going to see what that lands us on. Tap left click. Okay, and that changed it a little bit. So as you can see, that just shifts what we're viewing to 2-point. And we can also take this and shift this down to orthographic. Now, whoa, that's looking really different. Okay, so as I know we've all had a little bit of time to digest talking about the isometric kind of stuff in our assignment 2. This just lets you view all of your work in an isometric fashion. So some of those cool, graphics that Justin was showing earlier where it shows, isometric views of stuff, but, with nice materials kind of applied. This can be a really quick and easy way to get to that. So again, all I did was I'm just flying through the different viewing options. As you can see, orthographic is one of those options. So that can be a great tool. And then in all of these views, the exact same rules apply in terms of panning around, looking around by just clicking and holding left click, and strafing about by clicking and holding right click. So we're going to swing back to perspective. We want to stick with that for a moment. Here, we'll tap on spacebar just so that lands us back at the kind of the walking plane sort of view. All right, so I think now is a good time, now that I've chatted a little bit with you about us getting our bearings in the world of Enscape, for me to shrink this down a little bit and show you where the real magic of this software can come into play. We're going to shrink this down so that you can kind of see both screens. I'm going to close out of this. And again, sorry for how cramped my screen is getting. This will certainly be much easier for those of you who have 2 screens. Now, if we go up to extensions, We're going to tap extensions. We're going to move down to Enscape. And I want to make sure that we've all got something clicked here. Do you see live updates? Okay, this one is really going to be where the magic happens, because it basically means that anything I do inside this model is going to appear inside of what we're outputting in Enscape. So I'll show you what I'm talking about right now. Let's say I'm just going to draw, a really simple, doesn't have to be pretty, just a nice simple box of some sort. I'm going to quickly draw that up, use the push-pull, and look at that. See right there? That's just appeared in Enscape. I didn't have to like resync it or anything like that. If I want to edit that box in some way, if I want to, delete the top out of it or something like that, look at that. And again, both screens open. I can just jump right across really easily. But as you can see, anything I adjust over in my SketchUp window will automatically happen over there. So in terms of the value that this can kind of hold for maybe showing a client or doing a desk grid and having like something really nice rendered and live and not having to constantly hit like the live sync when you're jumping over to Lumion, Enscape can be a really fun kind of live and fluid sort of thing. Here, we'll go ahead and we're going to get rid of that box though. We don't need him right now. So all this is good, but I think now is a good time for us to maybe see how we can start having some fun in terms of like illuminating different elements of our views and really making them ours. So let's go ahead and we're going to swing inside of where I was showing you the coffee shop before. So here's another part of why I was bringing up scenes at the start. Notice here how if I have a scene saved, I can just tap and left click, and look at that. It will bring us there in the Enscape window as well. So again, any scenes we create in SketchUp, we can access in Enscape. Any scenes that we're going to create in Enscape, and again, we'll get to this in a little bit, will also appear in your list of scenes in SketchUp. So brilliant. We're going to go ahead and actually let's see what this. Okay, so really let's see what I've got. We're going to zoom in here a little bit, and I've got a little bit of a scene set up here, but it's kind of dark. So maybe I want to do something to illuminate it a little bit, make it kind of interesting. So I'm going to pick the watching piano player shot here. Okay, great. So we've got this lady here. She's playing the piano. That's all good, but it's a little dark. It could use a little enlightening. So here's what we're going to do about that. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to make this teensy a little bit bigger. We're going to go up to extensions, and I'm going to show you a really valuable tool in Enscape in terms of creating scenes that are kind of exciting to look at, and that is through Enscape objects. So your Enscape objects are essentially where you can create, lights and sounds and scenes and that kind of stuff. Now, for today, we're just going to focus on creating some lights, because again, lightening your views and your work is really going to be valuable to you. So again, all I did to get to Enscape objects, was I just went up to extensions, I went down to Enscape, and I just went down to Enscape objects. And that'll get you to all kinds of cool options for your spheres and your lights and everything like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the sphere option here. So what this will do is this is just going to add a spherical light to the model. And I'll show you how we're going to do it. Let's go ahead and pick sphere. And it's going to ask us to specify where we want that sphere to essentially be situated in terms of the model. So we're going to go ahead and, we'll pick a spot on top of the piano here. We'll tap left click. And then the second point that we pick will essentially denote kind of where we want that to be in relation to it. So we'll pick another point here on the piano. Yeah, that looks good to me. And see what that just did in the model? Now we've got that source of light. It's kind of added a little bit of extra drama and, a little extra versatility to the shot, made it a little more dynamic. But it doesn't stop there. As you can see here, I'll just shrink this a little bit so you guys can see this in real time. Check this out. I can adjust how intense this point sphere of light is by clicking and dragging the luminous intensity. So I can drag it up and I can really make that bright if I want to. And again, I can kind of adjust it as I need to. Whoa, that's a little bit too bright. Okay. But you can have some fun with that. If I want to adjust the radius of the light source, I guess just the size at which it's sort of projecting light in the first place, I can also click and drag and make it bigger like that. and revise it as I kind of need to. So I can make it really powerful or very, very soft and very kind of precluded. So that is your sphere light object. For now, we'll go ahead and get rid of that guy. Now, here's another interesting thing about working in Enscape through SketchUp. Any of these objects I'm going to pull in, you know, in terms of like people or these pianos or these light sources, they all function as SketchUp objects. So anything that I create here is going to be editable and movable just like any other SketchUp object I'm ever working on would be. So if I want to get rid of that, I can just move up to my select option, and it's just like deleting any other object in SketchUp. I can move over, I can pick this light, and I can go ahead and delete him. So, light gone. Let's try another one. We're going to try a spot light Enscape object. So, the spot kind of works in a similar fashion in terms of where your first 2 points, here we'll move him up a little bit, are going to essentially denote where your cone kind of thing is. And then the next 2 points are going to denote where your actual direction of this cone of light, of this spotlight goes. So if I want to maybe make this really powerful lighting towards like where she's playing the piano, I can tap left click. And again, first 2 points denote the cone, the second 2 points denote the size. And have a look at that. We see that we've now got just that nice little subtle piece of lighting there. I can turn up the intensity, make it just a little bit brighter. And as you can see, just like that, I've added a little bit of that extra something just to, you know, give this scene of this woman playing the piano a bit of dynamic flair. So that's the spotlight. We'll go ahead and delete them. The line is going to work in a little bit of a similar fashion, but this time we're going to swing over to where this guy's making coffee. And again, all I did was I just clicked over to this scene, and it brought my whole model with me. So I'm going to move up to Enscape Objects. I'm going to pick the line option, tap left click, and you're going to notice that just like before, I'm going to be able to essentially take that first click to specify what surface or what thing I want to make this Enscape object happen on. So I'm going to just tap left click, and that's going to specify essentially what surface I want this light to be on. So I'm going to make sure maybe this light is put in the corner here, because maybe this is kind of like one of those cool modern designs. It's like kind of, you know, backlit under the lip of the counter here. So we're going to tap left click, and you're going to see, do you guys see that right there? That just created that little bit of a light source right there. So what I can do now is I can turn up the intensity. See there, you can see how it's increasing kind of live. And I can also adjust the length so that maybe this is like cool sort of strip lighting or something. So what I'm getting at here is it's quite diverse in terms of like the sort of scenes of lighting that you can create in terms of your different tools. So that's the line lighting object here. That's essentially what lighting is all about at this stage. Now, before we get into adding too much other stuff, I think it's a good time now for us to talk about actually getting into Enscape itself and saving our views. So we had a chance to chat for a little bit about BIM. You know, we've talked a little bit about our perspective. Now let's move over here to our binoculars. So our binoculars is where our view management is. We're going to tap left click, and you're going to see here, this is where we can save any of our shots that we have. So it kind of works a little bit like Lumion in this regard. As you can see, remember how I was saying before that anything we save in SketchUp is going to exist also in the Enscape output as a view. Well, it's going to work the other way around too. But before I show you that, let's go ahead and let's go outside, and we're actually going to try saving a view somewhere here. So here, let's walk over to our coffee shop here, and we'll say, yep, we're happy with this one. We like this one. What we're going to do is, again, with our binoculars active, we're going to move down to Create View, and we're going to tap left click. Now, again, here's where you also have some power to adjust what you're looking at in a case-by-case basis. I realized that when we were in Lumion, we had all kinds of options that we could trick out in terms of like color shifting and adding like watercolor effects and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. It's a little bit more pared down and simplified in Enscape, but what you can do is this. Once you're saving this view just like this, what you can do is you can do things like you can set your Enscape sun position to whatever you want for that shot specifically. So if I want to change like the azimuth or anything like that, revise the altitude or anything like that, I'm going to be able to do that. So if I want a really specific sun location, maybe I want to make sure it's nighttime or something like that. Oh, it's a little dark. Or kind of like a nice evening shot. I'm going to be able to. So all I'm going to do is once I kind of pick that shot that I like, I'm going to move down to hit create. And just like that, that should be saved. So then if I click through, and then I click back to this one, look at that. It's saved that view exactly as I want it. And I guess drive the point home about the fact that any view you save here will appear also in SketchUp. See this? That scene that I just created in Enscape is now available in our tab of scenes right here. So if I want to, go back to another scene, but then I decide, hey, I really want to see that evening shot of the front of the coffee shop, I can just tap my scene here. And just like that, it saved everything. It saved the time of day. It saved everything. So great. Now I think, okay, we've gotten a bit of our bearings on like lighting. We've had a chance to take a look at saving some scenes. That's all good. Now I think it would be a good idea for us to start having a little bit of fun with actually putting some entourage into this. So let's see what we can do about that. I'm going to stretch this and make it a little bit bigger. Now, before I jump into putting new ones in, I want to explain a little bit of something to you about what essentially like the entourage of Enscape is like. We're going to go back inside the coffee shop here. You see these kind of creepy mannequin people? You know how they looked a lot more like something in Enscape world than they do in here right now? That's for a really simple reason. Enscape's geometry works in such a way that it's really simply saved as a really clunky, blah, kind of polygon just like this. But it's only when you run it through the Enscape software that it actually like appears like something. And this is for one really big reason. For those of you who are working in Lumion, and sorry to keep bringing this up, but I just figure for the sake of comparison, you probably noticed that your model can get kind of heavy and chunky when you have like a ton of different models and a ton of different stuff going on in your model. Whereas with this, because these polygons are so pared down and so simple, you can fly around your SketchUp model like nothing. It's not going to be super covered by tons of heavy models and graphics. It's super simple. It's only going to be when you're in here, in your Enscape output, that you're going to see the nice, fully rendered version of what that model is supposed to be. So, with that in mind, let's take a step back outside. Let's say I want to add some people into this. Again, I'm going to go up to End Extensions, go down to my Enscape panel, and now I'm going to shift down a little bit. And now it's time for us to take a look at the asset library. So we're going to tap left click. It's going to take a minute to load. And you're going to see we have all kinds of stuff in here to choose from. We've got tons of accessories for scenes, bottles, coffee shop stuff, blinds, fans, you name it. We've got animals and that kind of thing we can put in. Cats, dogs, pigeons, for your out. Construction stuff, furniture, vegetation for you landscape students. I think that's going to be really handy. Particularly since Enscape's kind of updating this all the time and their library is getting pretty good. But we're going to take a click down to people in here. We're gonna see what people we can add in. So as you can see, you have all kinds of people you can add as entourage. Sitting, bikes, doing whatever. So why don't we go ahead and see how about actually adding one. So to add a person, here we'll pick this lady right here. We're going to pick the asset that we want to drop in. Tap left click, and we're going to essentially drag, and it's going to ask us to specify where we want to put her. So we're going to tap left click, and as you can see, that's put one in, but if we want to, we can put a whole bunch in. So assuming we're happy with just putting one in, we're going to go ahead and hit escape to indicate that we're all done, and that's going to bring our assets window back up. Let's try adding another one. I'm going to scroll down a little bit here, add this person. So we'll tap left click, and once again, it's going to ask us to specify where do you want to put that person. So we'll drag him over here somewhere, and once again, we'll tap left click. And because we don't need to see his clone anywhere nearby, we're going to go ahead and hit escape, and we'll see what this has done in our live window. Oh, look at that, perfect. So thanks to the handy Enscape Live Sync, we can see exactly what those people look like in there. Now, I know earlier I was chatting to you a little bit about how if I do things like adjust these and kind of treat them like the SketchUp objects that they live in SketchUp as, Enscape will essentially let us do that. So if I want to do something like move this character around, if I want to pick my move key right here, left click and drag her all around, put her back here or something, I can. Or like I can treat this object like any normal SketchUp item I maybe pulled in from the SketchUp warehouse. If I want to do something like scale her up or down, I can go ahead and I can use the scale tool. And again, it's just like editing any other thing in SketchUp. I can make her really big if I want to. We'll go ahead and undo that. But that brings us to a good thing here. If we want to do things like add in a whole bunch of things at once, we can do that really easily too. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to my extensions. Once again, I'm finding all this stuff just right here in the asset library. And let's take a look at some of this vegetation. Maybe I want to add in some thick bushes to the front of this nice coffee shop I've got here. I'll just tap left click and I can click, but I want to add another one. Okay, no problem. I can just keep clicking until I hit escape to indicate to Enscape that I'm all done. I can add in as many shrubs or trees or any stuff like that that I want. If I hit escape and it takes me back to the window, oh great, I can add something else. Maybe I want to add some, I don't know, some feather reed grass or some Carl Forster grass or something like some of this too. So adding your stuff in, like your materials and that sort of thing, is super quick, really easy, and your asset library is your ticket to doing it all. And again, if you fly through this, you're going to see, wow, they've got tons of different options for deciduous, coniferous. Let's see what coniferous has for us to show. Okay, cool. So there's some different options here, if you want to add fir trees or whatever. So that's a little bit on adding in assets and that kind of stuff. Now, a while back, someone asked about materials and binding materials, and I think Enscape might be a pretty good method for those of you who are interested in that kind of stuff to look into binding materials in sort of a permanent sense. So let's move over here a little bit and let's see what we can find. So the thing about adjusting your materials in Enscape is that Enscape has a pretty robust engine of different materials that it can produce that look a certain way. So let's say here, okay, I want to assign an actual material here. So I've got these containers that I maybe want to do something like, kind of do something funky and put some water. I'm not sure how to do it, and I don't want to just use like kind of the sort of cheesy ones that are just built into SketchUp. Okay, no problem. Enscape is going to help us do that. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to move down to our materials panel. And we're going to say we want to create a completely fresh material. Let's say, yeah, I want these all to be full of like a cool kind of water. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move over in my materials panel to create material. And I'm going to tap left click. And then we're going to call this water material 1. Okay. We're going to change the color here so that it is maybe a little bit more of a blue here. Now, I will say this, when you're working on your different material in Enscape, anything you create in SketchUp, again, you're going to be able to edit in the Enscape output. So it is really worthwhile to title this something that you can remember. So I'm going to remember I titled this material here, Water Material 1. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And now that I've created that, I'm going to go ahead and apply it to all the stuff that in a minute I want to show as really, really cool water. So, great. Water Material 1, I've got that applied. If I want to do something to really make a dynamic material in Enscape, what I'm going to do is once I've got that saved, I'm going to move up to extensions, down to Enscape. Okay, so now I'm going to scroll all the way down this list here. Now, you're probably seeing tons of these different options and materials here. That's because this currently, Enscape is looking through every material that we currently have saved inside of SketchUp right now. So every like random kind of offshoot sort of color I've maybe created here or there is currently living in here somewhere. So this is where having a good naming convention and remembering what you named your material that you want to beef up with the material editor is really worthwhile. So I'm going to scroll all the way down this list. Water Material 1. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to click into this. Traditionally, it's going to look something like this. Once you've created a completely fresh material, it's going to be a generic sort of thing. So basically what that's going to look like is, if I open my Enscape window, is it's just going to kind of look like a flat sort of blank surface. But if I want to actually do something with it, I'm going to move up to type. I'm going to tap down, and you're going to see essentially Enscape's going to render this in whatever sort of style I input into it. So if I want to pick, if I want this to appear as like a clear coat, or if I want this to be grassy or something like that, I can adjust all that stuff. Now I'm going to move all the way down to water. And now essentially what that's going to do is the Enscape's now going to treat that as a really, really well realized water material. So what I can do is I can adjust my color. If I want this to be kind of like a darker water material, I can. And you're going to see just like that, that's now created a pretty convincing water material. So what we're going to do is, if we want to try editing that, I go again to drop down. All I'm doing is I'm just going down Enscape Material Editor. And I believe you should be able to make your water red if you want. If I want to turn up things like caustic intensity, I can as well. Again, really the idea here is, and then you can see you can do things like turn up your caustic intensity, a lot richer and more dynamic traditional water material that you saw when you probably all first started playing with SketchUp. That actually kind of shows some versatility. You can see some ripples in there. So, it's going to be up to you to play a little bit, but like the big idea here is, if I want to make it, it's gross. If I want to make like a nice dark, kind of rich or really deep looking sort of material, if I want to change the scale of the ripples, I can. So the idea here really is your Enscape Material Editor will remember anything that you've got saved in your somewhere in your SketchUp model, and let you essentially edit it, like edit in terms of type, which you just get to down here, to really like push it to the next graphic level. So that's a little bit about essentially your Enscape Material Editor. Okay, so to get to our visual settings, this is where we're going to really start making our experience in Enscape kind of unique. To get to your visual settings, you're going to move your cursor up to your visual settings right here, little eye with the scroller there. We'll tap left click. And you're going to see you have all kinds of different options in terms of what you can essentially edit in your model here. So first thing you can do is you can edit your style. If you currently, I have none selected as the mode, which just means it'll appear as I intended for it to appear in terms of like materials and objects I threw in. But if I want to, I can go to the drop down here. I can change it to white. I can change it to, I can change it to polystyrol, which, again, if you're maybe doing some work where you don't want like colors to be too distracting, you can adjust all this stuff, but currently I like to have it set on, normal, just because it can be kind of a good way to see what actual materials you have. If I want to do something like add in outlines to really add some extra graphic emphasis, I guess, to it, I can do that as well. If I want to make this kind of a little more cartoony, you can see I can turn outlines right up so that any object I have in here will have like a hard line on it. I can adjust things like my perspective, where again, I know that before I was kind of showing you how to change that up here, but you can do it in your visual settings as well. So if I want to change it to orthographic, I certainly can. We'll change this back to perspective. If I want to do something like adjust my visual exposure, I can grab this handy slider here, and I can also do that. So if I want to maybe make it a bit of a darker shot, a little bit more restrained, I can. If I want to make it super bright and kind of a little more blown out, I can certainly do that too. For those of you who want to create a shot that's like representative of what a person might be looking at, you can edit your field of view. So if I want this to be really zoomed in on something, I can make my field of view a lot smaller. If I want to drag it out, I can make my field of view huge if I wanted to. It's good to have it somewhere kind of in the middle, just so it's sort of realistic and doesn't include too much information, but it is an option to adjust in your visual settings. So your depth of field is really just the degree to which something is close to you versus once it's blurry, once it's a little further away. So we're going to slide this over a little bit. So if I want to adjust my depth of field, you can see turning it all the way down crispens up the whole image. But turning up my depth of field, you're going to notice it's getting blurrier, 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 and that blur is getting closer and closer all the time. See? Let's go ahead and keep this nice and turned down. But the idea is you can adjust it, and maybe if you want to make sure there's some element of your work that's really emphasized at the forefront, adjusting your depth of field can be just a ticket for that. Your output for rendering will be a little more relevant in a minute here, but you're going to notice you have the option here to also adjust your rendering quality. So if I really want to kick it up a notch in terms of what I'm looking at when I'm moving through my model in visual settings, I can turn it all the way up to ultra. And it's just going to crispen it up and just make it that much deeper and richer. So as you can see, that might have been subtle there, but you might have noticed that just added a little extra depth. If I want to go easy on my computer right now, I can ratchet it right back to medium or even draft if I want to make it a little chunkier, a little less rich, but also a little softer on my poor machine. So that's a little bit of your main visual presets. If I want to change over to image, you're going to have some options to adjust things here as well. You know, if I want to turn my highlights up, I can just make my whites a little punchier. If I want to make my shadows darker, oh, that's really dark, I can make it really spooky and really dark, or I can lighten them up. Maybe I have some content I want to show in there, but I still want people to know there's shadows in there. I can adjust that too. Let's have a move over here. If I want to do stuff like adjust my saturation, I can really take that up a notch. I know there were some questions about color earlier, so I can really turn up my saturation and make it really, really, really rich if I want to. Or I can turn it right down. I can make it super desaturated. Maybe I do want, just grayscale. That's totally an option. If I want to change my color temperature, I can drag it about the slider here. I can cool it off if I want to, if I drag it further to the right, kind of gray it out. I can also warm it right up if I pull it all the way over to the left. But if I want to do things like adjust my lens flare, you're going to notice that's going to have some effect sort of on how I'm viewing my sunlight. You see there? That little bit of lens flare appears. If I turn it off, the lens flare is gone. But if I turn it back on, we get that nice little bit of flare. So that's just a few things to think about, in terms of graphics, adding that extra little bit of realism. Enscape is a little more condensed than some of the other rendering softwares we'll probably talk about, but all these sliders can pretty much get you where you want to go. Vignette, I don't play around with that too much for the most part, but that's more of a stylistic choice. If I want to add some nice darkened edge to it, and I don't feel like taking this into Photoshop after, vignette, dragging it up, will just darken out the edge. Now, your atmosphere. This is where you really have some options to have fun with the weather around you. If I want to make my fog really intense, maybe this is a super foggy day. Look at that. I can kind of obliterate the background just by making it really, really, really foggy. So your fog option, you can slide that around as you want to. Maybe you want the day to be really crisp. Maybe you want it to be really foggy. Maybe you want to adjust where your fog kind of falls on the horizon. Maybe it's kind of above so that your ground is nice and in the middle of this fog storm. So you have the option to adjust that as well. If I want to adjust the brightness of my sunlight, I can use on the illumination slider, I can adjust that. So I can make this a really, really bright and sunny. Changing the time of the day rather. Well, I'll just hold shift and right click and drag over everything. So let's say I want to make it like nighttime, and maybe I want to make my night sky really bright. I can do things like adjust that. So I mean, if I really want to show a super dynamic, bright, sunny night, or starry night rather, I can do that just by adjusting my night sky brightness. Turn that back down. We'll make it daytime again. If I want to, let's take a look at the shadows here. If I want to make my shadows, if I want to kind of adjust how crisp they are versus how crumbly their edges might be, I can adjust the sharpness. See? I can really dial it up so that it's a very, very hard edge. Alternatively, I can tone it right back. Maybe, you guys are showing some sort of a scene that is at nighttime. And remember those lights that we created earlier with our Enscape objects? Maybe I've got those in place. So maybe I want to adjust those a little bit, because right now, this is very, very bright currently. I can go ahead and I can tap on this, the artificial light brightness scale, and I can go ahead and turn these right down. And as you can see, any of those lights that I previously created, I can make them really bright and really powerful, or I could turn them right down and make them a little softer and a little bit more subtle. Great. It sort of just creates a little bit of extra drama, I think. I could look into that one a little bit more too, but I find that usually for this one, your artificial light brightness is kind of going to be your ticket to everything that you want to do. But yeah, your ambient brightness too is just kind of like your surrounding lighting, so it can be good to have that turned on. So if I move over to the sky preset of visual settings, you're going to see that I have the option to either have my current default background or adjust this to my white background, which just means you're in this floating matrixy sort of place. Now, in the situation that you want to present something and you really don't want the background to be distracting at all, this can be a good option. But for now, we're going to turn it off. If I want to maybe make it so that my horizon is a little bit more interesting than just kind of this flat plane, I can go ahead and I can adjust my source. So I can change it from clear skybox to maybe I want to make this in a mountain setting or something. That's kind of cool. Maybe I want to adjust this so that it is in a construction or, town or something like that. I have all kinds of options to essentially adjust what all my work is situated in. And I know you guys will actually build up your site and add a ground plane and everything, and this is quick, but this just gives you an idea of the fact that you can do things like adjust your setting. If I want to rotate what part of my setting I'm looking at here, I can just grab the slider here and rotate it along so that maybe I can just nudge it around some. Instead of looking at that, let's take a look at something else which I think is useful, which is your cloud adjustments. So this will let you grab your slider here to either make your clouds very, very dense or very, very, very thick. So you can see you can kind of create a bit of a cloud cover if you want to. Take a little edge off the sunlight that way. You can adjust your variety of your clouds. If you want them to all be really like thick and fluffy or kind of a little bit more tenuous, you can. You can adjust cirrus amounts. There will be lots of time to play with this sort of stuff and sort of see what fits graphically with your drawing that you're trying to work on. You can adjust your contrails, latitude, longitude. So all that's great. We've had some time to kind of get to play with the sun a little bit. Now, regarding your output, because of course the key here is getting this out of the computer box in some way. Personally, I find the default settings are pretty okay. I like having it set in full HD resolution. Again, I would just always make sure that you've got your rendering quality set to ultra if you're trying to get something that's out for like presentation time. But I would say that yeah, full HD, if you've got it set at 1920 by 180, that should be plenty. I personally like the file format of PNG. Personally, I think that does a fine job. I always have my compression quality set to maximum, so if you more or less copy this screen, I think you're going to be just fine. But assuming this all looks good, you can just pretty much leave it like this if you want to. So we can X out of that. So all that's really great. And I know the big key at the end of all this is making sure that we can actually turn out something that gets out of the computer box in some way. So what are we going to do? I'm going to show you guys how to actually turn this into a JPEG, essentially, render it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move up to the top of the screen here, move down here to, I'm essentially going to find screenshot. Now don't worry, it's not just going to take a screenshot of whatever you're doing, it's actually going to produce a nice rendering as we want it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pick this one. I'm going to find a location to save this in. We'll say I want to save this as a presentation file, and we'll say this is coffee shop, and then date it. If I go ahead and I hit save, assuming I'm happy with all the visual settings and that kind of thing that we've just dialed in, I'm going to go ahead and hit save, and it's going to take a minute here. And now it's going to export. So this might take a minute or so because again, I've got the draft quality set to really quite high here. But once this produces something to where we put it out, but you're going to see that's going to produce a rendering of your work. So that's essentially Enscape at a glance. That's a little on like adjusting your materials, adding in entourage, tuning up your visual settings, and producing something. And again, if you're a student, you get it for free, so you won't get this annoying stamp anywhere on it. It'll just export as a nice, clean PNG.